All right, welcome everybody to our first unofficial podcast, Bree. So my name is Brian Fretwell. Likely y'all, one of y'all, or you people here at least, seen me on Instagram or TikTok or somewhere in there. I would assume that what got here. I know folks like Annette have been members for a long time. So welcome, Annette. Good to see you. And then I'm here with Bree Zoller, who is a counterpart here at Finding Good. Has been helping outline questions, draw the question of the week for 3 years, and overall just making sure the things get done that need to get done. Indirectly babysitting me is really the primary bit there, but she's also the resident expert on these kind of questions. Because she's been doing it almost as long as I have. Amber is also here. Amber Hamilton, she's our head of relationship development, and also one of the first people to ever do transformational listening. So she's been around for a while too. So what we're going to do today is we're going to give you a little snapshot of what we call the question of the week. So this is we create questions of the week on our membership, and folks like Annette and others from around the world come to practice asking questions, which I know sounds a little strange, but we'll explain to you what that is. But for the podcast, we're not going to just get into like, here's how we have this conversation. We want to step back and say, here's why we have this conversation. Here's the challenge we're trying to address. And now what we call transformational listening process and the questions that we design can be used we've used it for strategic planning in organizations. We've used it in organizational change. We've used it to help, improve relationships. But for the purposes of today, and when we approach the question of the week and a specific question, it's really about changing a conversation, right? And specifically in these areas where we're trying to have a positive influence on someone else. And that's kind of the easiest way to remember what it is we do, is this is about influencing more by saying less, right? And turning listening into maybe your most influential tool. Because if you think about it, when you think about the most influential people in your life, for almost all of us, it is the person that listened to us, that really understood us, that felt that allowed us to feel heard and like they knew who we were, that allowed us to see ourselves differently. And the design of these questions is really about doing the same using neuroscience and specific structures. Yeah. So today we're going to outline, and usually I'd pan to, but I didn't prepare it. We build all of our questions off of what we call the FIRES model. And so FIRES is an acronym for feelings, influence, resilience, ethics, and strengths. And these are all places that, in these conversations, we know from psychology and neuroscience can have a lot of benefit to people. I won't go into that except for to say today we're in the resilience category. And the question we're using on the question of the week today is in the resilience category. Now, I'm not going to share the question just yet. What I'd like to do, and the idea on this podcast is to be as interactive as we can. Now, I know there's different comfort levels, so if you want to interact on the chat, I encourage you to do that, or take yourself off of mute and chat here. But I'm going to start with a question. And the reason we start with this question is because it's rooted in the philosophy behind transformational listening. And that philosophy is simple. Everything you're trying to do is something you've already done, right? It's just generally there's a 10%, 20% difference, but your brain really has a challenge of I have this new challenge, and it can isolate and feel like I've never done that challenge before. And so all of these questions are kind of built on that outline, right? So to honor that outline, we want to start today. We're talking about resilience. And what I'd love to know from any of you or all of you, so you can put it in the chat or you can take yourself off of mute. What is one way you've helped build resilience in someone else or in yourself? Think of one way you've effectively helped build resilience. Like when it was hard, you're like, this thing you did helped somebody push through, or this thing you did for yourself help you push through. So go ahead and enter it in the chat or raise your hand quickly. I'm a former teacher, so I'm a sucker for the old school, like hand raise, right? Or just take yourself off of mute and let me know what, like, who's got a couple of strategies for how you've either built resilience in yourself or helped somebody else do it.
While we're waiting for other folks to respond, I'll just jump in here, Brian.
Yeah.
I do this with you. I did this when I went on maternity leave. I like to document how things went. So, and that's something that I do for myself of like, these are the things that I did, and this is what's successful. This is what we can improve on. And then not only that, but if someone else is doing it, I'll document what they did so that they have that blueprint for themselves in the future.
Yeah. And now that you say that, I'm thinking about like, yeah, after meeting blueprints, like, yeah, now I know your trick. No,
yeah,
super helpful trick, right? Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Okay. So documenting it. I see a hand raised over there. I don't know who it is, but go ahead.
That's Annette.
Oh, Annette, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi there. So when you first asked the question, what came to my mind was an experience my husband and I had with our kids quite a few years ago. I think the oldest was maybe 6, and we had a flood in our basement. So we called them down there and said, hey guys, we need to mop with this water. Here's some towels. We're just going to get the towels wet and then wring them out in the sink. And we thought it was fairly simple, but our oldest just broke down and he was so overwhelmed by all of this water and the mess, right? And so what we did was just acknowledge, like, well, this is hard. We've never asked you to do something like this before, but we also didn't like, oh, you can just go upstairs and play. We were helping, acknowledging that it was hard, helping, but also not giving him an easy out. And I hope that helped him realize that it's okay to say something's hard. It's okay to do things that are hard, and you can learn this new skill even if you're not enjoying it.
Yeah, and I love how you like identified it directly, like, yes, this is hard and this is new. And that's validating what we call validating the pain behind it, right? Like, and that's a piece that's unspoken. Like, I'm worried about it, I'm nervous about it because I've never done it before. I don't know how big it is. And you went right after that and said, yeah, and actually like created a little connection by saying like, yeah, I'm dealing with this too. Like, this is new and this is hard. And those things, that's fantastic. And then giving option, we would call that like agency in the psychology world, and even in the neuroscience world, like that, oh, I have choice in here. And those two really good tools are just making it easier for the other person. Any others in there? Oh, go ahead.
Dawn raising her hand.
I was looking for the physical, and there's like the little graphic one. The little graphic one, I was like, oh, it's a star. I must be doing well. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, I'm a teacher, so
beauty.
The last several years has been challenging. I teach at the university level, international students, but and a lot of my colleagues have retired in the last couple of years. But before then, there was a great deal of challenge all at once for people that weren't necessarily used to all the technology.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things I did for them was, as you said, acknowledge that this is not easy. It's too much at once, but then to sit down in a calm space and talk about what they already know, what they've learned in the past, and then simplify things.
Yeah.
As much as I could.
and
go through it with them, and then just tell them, so yeah, this is tough. And you need repetition. You're a human being. You can't do this right away, but you've done these things before. It's just different things.
Yeah. Dawn, she's like a resident expert. Like, you changed in like a change management modality or anything like that? Like, the structure there was impressive. Yeah.
I'm just a teacher.
Yeah, fair. I like it. Yeah. It's sort of that naturally, in there. Understandable. Yeah. Because I heard just sort of similar with Annette. There's like that validation that's happening, but then there's also that like, hey, you've done this before. And I think for a lot of people, the knee jerk is like, I know you can do it, so I assume that, and then instead of like helping pull that out, like, where have you done it before? I'm like, oh, this is going to be easy, and you've got all the skills to do it, and you're going to do it. And I do that and invalidate all of that other things, right? Like sometimes it feels like if we give voice to the painful part, we're going to make it worse. And in fact, what we find is that like when you give voice to that, when you validate the like, oh yeah, this is awkward, this is uncomfortable, you actually then take the energy out of it. I told this to Bree, I used to run, Bree and I met when we were facilitating in like oil and gas places and big power companies with folks that learning, sitting in a 2-day leadership course or a 2-day safety course wasn't their desired sort of outcome. And so I used to start the day by saying, hey, who couldn't sleep at night because you were so excited to sit through 16 hours of class, right? So what you do is you just directly address it and give voice to it, and then we take it away. What I'm going to show you here is our outline of the week. And what's cool is in so many of the examples that are in the examples that you all shared, you shared this sort of validation piece. And I want to see, I'm going to just do a share screen here, and hopefully this will be pretty, can you see this, Bree? Just checking in. Yeah.
I'd zoom in a little bit if you can.
Yeah.
If you click it, yeah, there you go.
Click on, oh, and it's even the right one. That's
Yep.
what Bree's doing right there. So this is a question of the week that we have in our membership area. Every week we have those, as you can see, kind of on the library. We've been doing them for quite a while, so people have access to weeks and weeks of those. But in this one, the question we have for this week that's in that resilience, and this is just one of many questions we can ask in the resilience space, is in the last month, what is something you tried to do differently in an attempt to make it better? Now, when we're talking about resilience, we're generally tying that with growth mindset. And so you can see in this outline, we have some of the information by Carol Dweck, who is the originator of growth mindset, and there's often an article linked to it. But I want to start with this question. In the last month, what is something you tried to do differently in an attempt to make it better? And I'm going to take off here and just like, I'd love to hear from y'all. What do you see in that question? Like what pops out to you when you, in the last month, what is something you tried to do differently in an attempt to make it better? Like there's some assumptions built into that question. And that's the thing. And Bree put the question there in the chat. So Dawn, you're smiling. I think if you identified what the assumptions are, go ahead and you can.
Well, first we assume you did something better. That's a big one.
Yeah. Well, and notice it says in an attempt to make something better, right? Yeah. And it assumes you did something differently. Yeah. Yeah, what else does anybody notice in that question? And when you see that question, like, what is your response to it? Go ahead, Susan.
I think for me, it's just like we're coming right off the first of the year, right? So resolutions. So it's like, what area of my life is giving me trouble, or where can I be better? Where can I present myself better to others? Mm-hmm. And how do I get from A to B, and what do I need to change?
Yeah. And this is like, as we look at this question in the last month, what is something you tried? So what we're trying to do is acknowledge the thing you've already done. Yeah. Like if Bree, because you helped design these, like when you look at this question, what like, and obviously, you know about the structure and how it's built, but like, where does your attention go?
My attention goes towards, we are identifying one thing that has happened in the last month. We're putting a time constraint on it, and we're saying this is something, the one thing that we are talking about in this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the design structure of that, like in the last month, what is something, or as Bree says, like one thing, what is something? So we're saying not like what are all the things, but what is something? And what's interesting here is what is something, and that would be different if we said what is the best thing. right? Do you see that difference? Right, so that like little tweaks in the question can have a big impact on the conversation. What is something you tried to do differently in an attempt to make it better, right? A big part of all of the questions and the conversations that you're going to see here is what we call permission or safety. And so what we try to design in a question like this is a lot of flexibility, right? This is what we call like a higher safety question. So it would be lower level. We have kind of 4 levels. I won't go into the detail on that. But when we say something you try to do better in an attempt, something you try to do differently in an attempt to make it better, then we open up the realm of possibilities for the answer, right? Like it could be something as like, I tried to get up earlier so that I could get more done, right? Like, okay, tell me about how you tried. And the beauty is now we can take something that someone might have been beating themselves up for. I tried to get up, and now we can amplify it, right? Like, why did you, why did you try? What improved? Like, what did you learn in that? All of these things, so that we can potentially increase the odds that it might happen in the future. Andrew, you got your hand up. What do you got?
Sorry, I can't turn the camera on just because my phone's not working correctly, so I apologize for that.
No worries.
So I have about in California probably about 25 or 30 employees, and then about 55 total between some other states. Yeah. And an issue we kind of run into is implementing processes. Some people will take them and run with them, and then you have some people that kind of they'll stand around and wait, So it seems like some people are maybe afraid of experimentation or new ideas because they want to see how it probably works out beforehand. Yeah. So I see this a lot where I'm trying to see how can I assure somebody that by doing something a little bit different is going to benefit them in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. And trying to view that in a different manner, how I can present that to them so that they will kind of take ownership of it and run with it. Yeah. And Andrew, I'm gonna like, that's a whole can of worms, and I want to pull out 1 or 2 worms in there. And specifically in here, like that part of like, well, I like it's kind of, I'll call it a trap of like a leadership trap of like, we have this change, I know it's going to make it better. Well, now I'm in the business of convincing somebody else. Right. And what I'm trying to do is convince them to believe me. And the challenge with that is like, what if it doesn't work out? And they almost guarantee have instances in their life where somebody said, do this thing and it's going to work out better. And it didn't. Right. So you're butting up against that. And so instead of, and where we look at the design of a question like this, instead of trying to get them to believe me, what I'm trying to do in a question like this is to get them to believe themselves. So 2 things in here, as you described, and I think I saw Bree smiling because what you were identifying in terms of like really love change and not a big fan of change is like Bree and I, right? Like we operate really well as a team because of that difference. We were actually just talking about it before the call of like the idea of turning this into the podcast was like in the last 24, 48 hours from me. And Bree's kind of like along for the ride, but like her comfort level is what is the structure? What is the, what are like, she would have a detailed outline for this. And that's where her comfort level for that change would go. And I explain that to you, or I rather explain that simply to put context into this question. Using a question like this or thinking about it this way, Andrew, is each and every person kind of lines up on this spectrum of change. And when I ask each person a question like this, where have you successfully changed before? Where have you gone through? Where have you had to do something new and it turned out well? What I'm getting as the leader is all of the key ingredients that unique to this person that will allow them to be comfortable and confident for the change, right? That allow them to believe in themselves. Yeah, go ahead, Bree.
I want to add on to that of we also might learn from those employees about maybe there was like certain ingredients we hadn't thought of to make sure that change is successful by asking that question. How have you done this before, so that we can make sure, so we know what works for them, but we also know what might work for the process as a whole for the entire organization to be successful in the change.
Yeah. And the way I remember it, Andrew, is like for those of us, and I'm gonna kind of assume a little bit here on you, Andrew, and as much as like I'm kind of gonna assume you're like me, that you actually like change. Is that a fair?
100%.
Yeah. So the challenge with that is then it's hard to actually empathize with the fear of somebody that doesn't like change. So what I want you to do is think about like, what are you irrationally afraid of? And so for me, that's heights. I have always, like, you get me above about 15 floors in a building and I shut down. Like, it's like, I literally won't sleep above the 20th floor on a hotel room. I've got plenty of stories of like, we had the penthouse suite, we got upgraded and my wife was excited, and then we slept on the 20th floor because I couldn't sleep, right? But if I think about that, like, this change thing might be as uncomfortable for them as heights is for me, then like, where have you been successful becomes really, really key. Is that helpful? Because we're gonna show you the conversation in here. Yeah. Did you have something else to add or to ask in there?
No, I guess I was trying to narrow it down as much as I can. My bigger issue is more so one person that seems to struggle with it. Most people are pretty good about it, but I have one person that it's like, I want to do my best to work with what works for them.
Yeah.
But it takes more time and energy on that side of it than, the group collectively.
Yeah. So the last thing I'll say on there is like, and this is something we tell leaders all the time, is spend more time in the places that it's working. And that includes with the people that it's working, right? Like the one like cog in the wheel, we end up spending way too much time on, versus like, if I'm spending my time and effort where it's working, then that other person, right, has a choice to make to some degree. But that's a really broad explanation for a really deep conversation. With that, we're going to do the second piece of this. We're going to actually show you. So the question is just like the tip of the iceberg. And in our membership, what we've done for the last 3 years, and we did it as an experiment for the first year. Annette was part of that experiment. Bree was part of that experiment, where we actually started with one question before we even built the model. And it wasn't just the one question. It was a structure of how now you get to practice having a conversation. And we practice it like this, but I also do this a lot in real life. The importance of the practice is about like training my brain to avoid what we call SOFA. So SOFA is an acronym for suggestions, opinion, feedback, and advice, which is like, we need those things in life: suggestion, opinion, feedback, or advice. But as far as your brain is concerned, when you're trying to influence somebody else, those are some of the least effective tools there are. It's the things we spend the most time on, trying to convince somebody, trying to give them feedback, but they're not nearly as impactful as listening can be. Now, with that, I want to say, like, all of the strategies that we hear for how we build resilience, how we influence, are fantastic. What we look is like, with this style of listening, with this way of like validating and then amplifying it, this is like an additional tool in the toolbox. We don't believe for a second that like this is a magic thing that's going to make all your problems go away and there'll be bunnies and rainbows and happy days. But it can dramatically affect and improve the things that you're already doing, right? So with that, we're going to show you in a 5-minute, in a 5-minute round. Let's do a 5-minute round, right? In a 5-minute round, one person is going to be the person asking the questions, and one person is going to be the one answering. And I think on this first round, we'll, you can tell me, would you rather see me and Bree do it, or is there somebody, like Aunt Dawn says, yes, that's an emphatic yes. Okay, so please don't, like, yeah, understand. And I have to say, and in reference to Andrew, like those of us that like change, the first time we were doing these on, I would pull people out like, oh no, good, like let's ask questions in front of a bunch of strangers, no problem, and you just see people turn white. So I've learned to be able to see that a little more now. Okay, so Bree and I. Now, Bree, do you want to be the one asking or answering?
I'll be the one answering today.
Ooh, I like it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're going to do is 5 minutes, and I'll actually have a timer here, right? And what I want you all to do is sort of just kind of watch what's happening. Like, what do you think is informing the questions I'm asking? What is the benefit, right? And what are you thinking about while Bree is giving her answers here, right? Okay, we'll start the 5 minutes. So Bree, in the last month, what is something you tried to do differently in an attempt to make it better?
So I'm not sure how I'm going to classify this as better, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm newly back from maternity leave. And something that I'm doing differently that I never did before is that I am actually trying to build structure in my workday where I am trying to do all of my work in 4 days a week, so that I have time to do stuff around the house and I have time to take care of my baby.
And what is the purpose of that? Like, what is the better you're trying to make?
The better that I'm trying to make is to be, I guess, more intentional with my time. Like, I want to be present with my child when I'm with her, and I want to be present with my work when I'm doing it. I don't, I've had a couple of moments where like I try to write an email while she's sitting on my lap, and I'm not paying attention to her and I'm not paying attention to my work. So it's that intention and presence aspect.
And so what is one thing, if you could define, like, so it sounds like you've been doing this in a lot of different ways. What is one thing that you've done that you can say, doing this has allowed me to be more intentional?
Putting work hours on my calendar and trying to fit all of the work that I'm doing in those hours, in that time block.
And so putting all of those and fitting it in, what is that skill? What is the actual skill to be able to do that?
I guess I'd call it time management.
So time management, tell me more about that. Why is it time management? It's
time management because I know I have X amount of hours of work a week, and looking at how I'm fitting it into my week, and organizing it so that I'm efficient with the time that I'm using.
And how do you make the decision of what stays and what doesn't?
Am I getting paid? Is one aspect of it. Like,
yeah,
not, if I limit, I used to have like fun conversations, like maybe 6 times a week. And now it's like, nope, I've got time for one of those a week.
Because if you put more in, what do you lose?
I lose that efficiency. I want to say efficiency, but that doesn't sit right. It's that intentionality with my time of I've got my work time and I've got my family time now. They need to, that if I do that, those fun conversation, that eats into my work time and that eats into my family time.
And so it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this sounds to me like the time management is really about prioritization for you, like really prioritizing things. Definitely. And what do you think are you prioritizing above others? Like if you'd identify the thing you're prioritizing most, what is it?
I'm prioritizing my commitments. I am committed to the work that I'm doing. I am committed to my family.
Yeah, like to your family. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
And what has been the benefit that you've reaped?
that at the end of the day, I can confidently turn off work.
And can you think about like, even in the last 2 days, when
Mhm.
you've been able to do that and what you got, like, what was the moment that like, boy, this is me reaping the fruits of that reward?
I can just think about it, at 5 o'clock, I go for a walk with my daughter.
And is that, you did
And
that yesterday?
yeah,
And how did you feel in that moment?
it felt it felt so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is good? What, like, good
Good
because?
is good because I was with her. I was giving her all of my attention, and not just her. I should say my husband was right next to me too. Like,
Yeah.
forget about him. But I could be with both of them and not, and my attention was fully on the two of them.
And it
Nowhere
sounds
else.
like that's what your that's what your prioritizing and time management has created for you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's 5 minutes. Everybody give Bree a round of applause.
Almost made me cry there, Brian.
Well, that's the goal. I'm just kidding. Sorry, that's a joke that Bree and I kind of have ongoing, is like, and to address that, like, specifically, like, really getting into just validation. I'll just describe it as validation broadly. Like, when you're validating things that people really care about and that are meaningful for them, like, it can be teary, it can be emotional, and that's not just for like folks like us that tend to be a little more like emotionally present, if you will. Like, especially in the first year that we did this, like, I had farmers on this call that like would, they try to say less than 10 words in an entire day and all, but like, we are designed for validation. That's how we get connection as humans. And so when you see that, like, oftentimes, like, you sort of prepare for the emotionality of it, right? Because that's a person being seen. Now, I'm curious from you all, what did you notice? What stuck out to you, right? And maybe even what did you like? Did you have any insights of your own while you were listening to Bree's answers? Go ahead and raise your hand or write in there. Like, what did you notice in the conversation? Go ahead, Dawn. You get a big smile, so it's like, feel like there's something in
Like
it.
I talk too much now. Anyway,
No.
basically, well, what's impressive is how much detail you go into if you really listen, and then you ask questions and listen, ask questions, listen, ask questions, and then you were talking about time management, but then you really were talking about priorities.
Mhm.
And you're just drilling and drilling and drilling until you get down.
And what do you think creates that? What do you think allows, like, to keep drilling? Like, what do you have to have?
Well, you have to have the relevant question, but then you also have to listen long enough.
Yeah, it's the curiosity. What we tell people is like, we call it authentic curiosity. And to do that, I cannot assume that I know anything Bree's talking about. Like, even when she said good, like, what is good? Right? And that's that simple one. Or she says time management, my brain wants to say, oh, I know what time management is. Well, whoa. Tell me about what that means to you. And the more I get out of the thinking I know what she is saying, the more opportunity I have to discover new stuff. Yeah. Nice. Andrew, what do you got?
I guess the thing that sticks out is kind of the one I relate heavily to what she has to say, but is how the answers are kind of there already. Like, it seemed like she hasn't thought about it enough and understands enough of what direction she's choosing and wants to go, and that all the answers essentially, I guess, are there. But I guess asking the right questions helps. I guess lay it out in a better manner, or validate it or confirm it.
Yeah, 100%. What you're hitting on there, Andrew, is what we call just clarity. Our brain is designed to remember all the bad things we did. Like, if you reach a goal, every one of us are designed, like, the moment you hit a goal you've been trying to achieve for a while, About 5 minutes later, you're thinking about what I could have done better, what I could have improved on, what I fell short on. And that is by design. We call it a negativity bias. 5 or 10 to 1. My brain is focused on what I should have improved versus what I did well. And what happens is, like in this conversation, you might have even heard it with Bree, like, well, I guess it's time management. Well, I think it's this. That's actually like discovery happening. That's like a small insight that's happening in the moment because somebody else is like amplifying that part that the brain is now like, oh, I have to figure that out. Yeah. Bree, and then go ahead. Yeah.
I want to add in real quick before we jump over to Annette and what she heard, but with that, sometimes the questions or sometimes the answers, Andrew, don't always come back quickly. That's, fortunately, this was a Q&A session where I was able to respond very quickly, but sometimes we have conversations where I have to sit and think for, 30 seconds about, what was that? And sometimes that's really uncomfortable to just sit and wait for someone to respond. And that's something that we actually practice quite a bit in here as well, is sitting through that discomfort. And for the question asker, you don't need to change the question. Sit there and let them think, which is a hard thing to do. And for the respondee, to sit and think about, what is my genuine response to that? I just wanted to add that one in there as well.
Yeah, I don't know is a fantastic response to hear, because it tells you that the person is exploring a place they probably haven't thought about before. And especially when they're exploring a strength, they're exploring something they want to repeat. Like, I don't know means like, oh, we're building the confidence in that area. And I don't know is like a perfect response. Like, cool. Like, yeah, what do you know about it? You know what I mean? Like we do. Yeah. And as Bree said, like sitting in the discomfort of the quiet, if you're an extrovert like me, oh man, that is a muscle that I have to develop on a consistent basis. Yeah, because I want to fill in the void of silence, and introverts hate me for it. Yeah. Annette, go ahead.
Sure. Something Dawn said, she used the phrase drill down. And that's almost how I think about these questions. Is in my mind, it's like this picture of a funnel. Like usually the initial response is this broad term or idea. And then my job as the questioner is to like, okay, where's the nugget? Where does that come from? What's the value or what's the strength of the person that I'm talking to? Not that it's not like a meandering, I'm going to take it where I want to go or try to lead someone there. It's really like figuring out what's behind it. Yeah. And then I know for me in identifying those things, like what are the values that are important to me? What's my personal strength? Clarifying that then allows me to apply it in so many different areas. Like you said, if we're looking at a challenge, chances are we've done something like this before. And knowing, I can like rattle off the top of my head now because I've done these questions a lot, like, oh, I know what my strengths and my values are. And not that those are static, but just a snapshot right now of what those are.
Yeah. Yeah. Our brain does really well with repetition. The problem with that is because it has this negative bias, we naturally have negative repetition, right? Like your brain is constantly telling you what you're doing wrong all day long. It's even in the, like, I love to talk about like your default mode network, meaning like when your brain is in idle, it defaults to thinking about all the things you did wrong in 5th grade. You know what I'm talking about. Like the thing, like you wake up, like right before you go to bed, you wake up and like this embarrassing thing you did when you were like 15 years old or something. And all of a sudden you're ruminating about it. That is by design. That's your brain's way of like protecting itself. And so what we call this amplification. And then what Annette is addressing is like the frequency, like the reason we do these questions weekly, or like we tell people about like being able to plan these questions into your interactions, not just thinking like, oh, now I know what I'm going to do it. The repetition of this then is now that's my brain's go-to. What we're doing is trying to create a new, if you will, neural network, which is I'm kind of oversimplifying the neuroscience on this, but like I'm building that muscle of like, I did this because I care about this. I did this because this is my strength. I did this because here's how I build confidence. And the amplification of that in a consistent manner is then making that muscle easier so that now I'm actually changing what I'm looking at. So in this conversation with Bree, right, we just altered to a small degree Bree's reticular activating system. That's your brain's kind of filtration system, meaning Bree is going to see that time management activity slightly differently because of this conversation, because we amplified the part of that time management that was about priority and that was about her family. And we brought that emotion to it. And when we amplify that emotion, that makes it even easier for your brain to remember. And now we, over time, really change that experience of, time management, because I have limited time and I have nothing to do, into, I am prioritizing my schedule so I can go on a walk with this amazing, beautiful new baby that I'm always asking her to show me on camera, because it's just so, anyway, yes. So that practice is what we design. I think that's a good kind of explanation almost there, Annette, of why we approach the learning of what we call transformational listening in a less than traditional way. It's very experiential. We have our facilitator membership, and the regular group membership is really about how many times can we actually get and apply the concept. So initially we just had practice sessions, just like you saw, and general members, like you can get access to practice sessions for like $5 a month. And then facilitators, we actually get together and like identify, like, how are we going to apply it? How do we actually build out a plan? And the transformational listening modules are actually incorporated in there. But the idea is that, like, approaching this like a gym, right? Approaching this like, I'm going to go ask these questions to build this muscle of curiosity and to help the other build this muscle of clarity, right? And the more we build that muscle, the easier this becomes. It doesn't necessarily matter that you know how to do it. It's actually, does my brain have like the muscles built up, as Annette has just said, like, then it's a more natural. And what we find is that then if I'm not practicing it for 2 or 3 weeks, I get rusty really quick. Anyway, that's a fantastic, I think, outline of the conversation. I know we talked about we're almost right at 40 minutes. So we're going to end the general podcast here. I'll just say, I want to thank you all for here. We're going to hang out and answer questions after this. For those listening on YouTube, thanks for showing up for our first one. This kind of interactive, collaborative sort of podcast style is my forte. I love conversation. I don't do really well just talking out there by myself. And it's important to us at Finding Good that whenever we're influencing the world with this, we're doing it in a way that's applicable, that people leave with tools. So I hope that you've left with some ideas and maybe some tools you can use. I encourage you to go try this question. And as I tell every group, go out and screw it up, because that's how you make it better, right? So